When we refer to someone as yellow, we consider them to be what?
Chinese?
Not Chinese. Over to Jerry and Murray now. Yes, Jerry.
Cowardly.
Cowardly is correct.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger,
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
That's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
G'day, Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Pretty good. You're looking pretty schmick there. I know that those listening to the audio feed won't pick up on your green screen action in the background, but I do.
It's not a green screen. It's actually I've upgraded. I've actually renovated my mum's bedroom, so it's looking pretty good, isn't it? Got the neon lights and everything.
So this is a note to our listeners that tune in via the usual channels, that even though we're not becoming a video podcast because that's too much work, every now and then we are cracking with videos. So we did one last time with Sheriff from the Building Beautifully YouTube series, and
This is like my university course director all over again, trying to pronounce every Indian and Asian name, just worried, petrified, stepping on eggshells.
oh god, well this episode's going to be a bit of a challenge for us then, I suspect.
Well, they say, Andy, that we have a voice for radio, but a face for radio too. So I think this, I'm not so sure about that though, because we had a lot of good feedback about some of the video work that we've been putting out there. So I thought I'd upgrade the camera so you get to see us in high definition. Not very kind to my wrinkles though.
Yeah, you might need some Clearasil there, I think.
Clearasil? No, retinol.
So are you ready for a question from our listeners?
Yeah, I'm going to try to just be a little bit removed, less triggered by the questions. So hit me. I'm in a good state of mind.
Okay. All right. So it's actually a bit different this week. This isn't so much a question, but more a summary of some feedback we got on our previous episode on housing affordability with Sheriff from Building Beautifully, as we just discussed. I'm going to read for you an abridged summary of some of the comments we received. So I'm going to start with Philip Byrne, who shared his experience with the disruption from living next to a development site, noting the lack of incentives for developers to consider neighbouring residences. Ironbark88 made a comment about their stance on development, saying they're not a NIMBY or a YIMBY, NIMBY being not in my backyard, YIMBY being yes in my backyard, but rather a DIMBY. Depends in my backyard. Ruben pointed out the economic paradox of Sydney's housing market, suggesting that high property prices persist because there will always be people who can afford them, whether through high salaries or parental support. And Ballamat 5, I think, had the best suggestion of them all, who proposed sending the elderly to regional areas to free up city space for the young. And Papa Bludgeon supported this, adding that it could improve health services in regional Australia. So, what's your take on our comments from last week's episode?
It's always a very touchy subject, and I think actually, when we had Ruben on to talk about what was our most contentious topic that we've ever done, he talked about Apple versus Android or whatever it was, right? But actually, I think really in Australia, it's housing, because it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg or the tip of the spear, whatever you want to call it, where it brings out all these generational divides and immediately puts people like boomers and millennials and Gen Z in opposition straight away, where I think that there's this refusal or maybe this inability for the generations to almost like empathize with what they're going through, what each other are going through. And I think that came out a lot in the comments, right? Like that how people think about this thing, and I do think that we did take a very one-dimensional approach, because we were talking around the YIMBY NIMBY situation. But as you know, and we kind of probed a little bit, it's a much more complicated, right? Like, put it this way: if the YIMBYs got their way, and I know that there was this one line actually in the interview where I think Sharaf said, "Oh, it's just simple economics. If you increase supply, the price will go down." And I could tell that you were on the edge of your seat, because there's nothing simple about this situation when it comes to housing and housing prices at the moment. There are a lot of factors at play, and we didn't really talk about a lot of those things, and I think that I do feel for some of those comments when I was reading them, saying, look, after you're through with all the generational kind of punching bags and stones being thrown, there isn't a really easy answer. There's not a silver bullet when it comes to housing in Sydney and Melbourne, right? And you could dump a whole lot of supply into the market and it still probably wouldn't fix things immediately. I am kind of here for the comments and I can appreciate like the back and forth and the shot taking, but we didn't explore the full range of what it's really going to take and what a middle is on this issue. And I think we need to do that in future episodes around what we actually think is going to take, because it's not going to be just one thing, right? And we didn't talk about immigration. We didn't talk about all this other stuff that affects the different sides of this, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think just fundamentally when you look at Sydney, right, you've got a city that, let's say 50 years ago, and, this is where the classic kind of example of, the $10,000 house or something, how outrageous that, you bought your house for such a ridiculously low amount. And now it's like that house is millions of dollars. But back then, we did talk about how suburbs like in the Hills District, like Cherrybrook, were like the outer suburbs, not even 50 years ago, but like even just 20 years ago. And now they're very much sort of, probably the inner the inner suburbs now, when you go out to places like Rouse Hill, and it's then like feels like another 20 kilometres beyond Rouse Hill. And for those who don't know Sydney, Rouse Hill is a very long way away from the centre of Sydney. So it's a bigger city, and the number of people I don't know what our population is, but it must be 5-6 million, something like that. You can't double in size in that way over that period of time, or even triple, whatever the actual numbers are, and expect that Sydney is going to still be like it was in the 1960s or 70s. It's going to be quite different, and you can't just keep growing out further and further and further. You have to explore high density housing, and some people don't like that and don't want to live in that type of environment. If you don't want what Sydney's got to offer, there are other places, and they do exist. And it's just people want to live in Sydney, but they want a house in Sydney too. So there's a bit of cake and eat it too, but realities change.
I think the other thing that I actually received as a bit of feedback directly to me from some of our regulars was this idea that Maitland and Marsden Park and all these areas, they're actually like the people that live there are very proud of the area. And so when they hear things like that, as they're being held up as examples of what's wrong with the planning and so on, they're very offended. And I understand that, right? Because I think that not everyone has the same idea of what a suburb should be or what the experience should be, right? And they defend it fiercely. I will just quickly double back to the original comment around the disruption of saying yes in your backyard. Now, I talked about that Lane Cove example, and that was, 3 years of hell. But I do think that, and I replied, I think, directly to that comment on YouTube, the people that are affected, where it's literally the next block that's being developed, the impact to them is totally disproportionate, right? Like even just like one house back, it can be like night and day in terms of the experience. And I do think that those people who are really taking a hit when it comes to this, moving forward in progress, we need to be very kind to them.
I remember like maybe probably was 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, the Treasury Secretary at the time said something to the effect of like about because house prices were sort of starting to ramp up. Said something to the effect of it's the block effect, right? It was a little bit of one of those like embarrassing. Oh, he shouldn't have said that. That's not very sophisticated economic analysis or whatever. He said it's like people just love the shit out of these over the top, over engineered homes, and these like it's a lifestyle thing, and I do think that's true. Like part of that's true. Maybe not the block in some of the opulence of the properties that they work with, but we treat our homes as like it defines us. It says who we are, like our success in our life.
It's the castle.
It's the castle, and it's our lifestyle. It's like we can entertain, and we've got to have like the Scandi like furniture look and all that sort of stuff. It's full on.
That's the Australian and American dream, right?
And we're pumping all this money, like we're pumping disposable income into this thing. And if you want also to have that, if you want the house that's going to keep up with the Joneses, whether in terms of size, location, like how done up it is, it's going to be expensive because everyone is competing.
It's different lifestyles, right? Like you said, I just think that, we do need to think about this in terms of household units and families, right? And that was my point, that it's all good to say that, apartment, we're going to have to be comfortable with living in apartments or whatever. But that's not, I don't necessarily think that we need a fundamental rethink of what that means then for families. Because like I said, I've been on both sides of the fence, and it does have an impact, right? You can make it work, but it definitely has an impact on how the kids have room to move. And I'm not saying everyone needs that, that kind of patch of grass in the backyard or whatever, but we're talking about having space to grow. It's like when you see those documentaries of cat ladies that have like 13 cats in an apartment. The cats actually like suffer. They have mental issues when there's more than like 5 in a house. But the main thing that I wanted to draw on to was where we ended, and I could see some of this vein in the comments, right? Like especially from the younger generation. Everything breaks down in society when the link between effort and reward just is so fundamentally or obscenely broken. And again, housing is that tipping point in Australia. Doing well at school, going to uni, getting a good job, getting a good income, it doesn't matter unless you have property, because you can do all those things. You can be a doctor, but you will still be poorer than the person who bought the land and built a house for 20K 40 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, that's because like we define success as, which like how far away from the CBD do you live, right? And the good thing
is
about
effort though, right? Like there's nothing that you've done to increase the value of your property. It's just a market thing.
Boomers are like the most maligned generation out there because they're perceived as having all of these advantages and benefits, right? But I think because boomers did genuinely go through some reasonably tough economic periods, right? They didn't have like a lot of money necessarily. They also had, they did have to kind of make sacrifices to enter the housing market, even though property was a lot cheaper back then. But I do feel it's the Gen Xers. They sail through. They
keep their head down.
They bought property. Generally, not all. Obviously, there's different experiences for individuals. But like they were entering the market sort of in the 90s, early 2000s. That was like such a easier time to enter the market. Like it was only really like from 2010 onwards that it went so really crazy. And they're still like...
We need to get some Gen Xers on the show, because we haven't really had... I suppose Ruben is Gen X, but we have
But if
to
you're
get,
Gen X, let's just think about this for a sec. Let's say a Gen X is in the order of, say, 10 years older than we are. And without, to reveal our age, put it this way, when did you enter the property market for the first time?
I think it was 2014.
Okay, so 2014, and I think I entered the property market 2016. So 2014, 2016, right? Imagine so we're talking about an age gap of 10 years. so if you entered the property market, say 2005, right? What a different world you're living in now, right? Because you've bought that property, which is probably a third of the price of what it is now, or even less. And not only that, you're not that much older. Like, you're not like a boomer who's like literally like has, in their final decades of life, right? You've got like a good life ahead of you. They're not that much older than us, right? But they're still in like the workforce. They're still in the workforce, or like earning big bucks and all of that stuff, right? But they've got this like house with this mortgage of like, that's like literally a third of what like someone buying a property today would be. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, this can be like your colleague that's at the same. They can be your peer, right, at the same level as you in the workforce, right? And they literally like have this better, such a better deal than you, like, and it just and I just don't feel there's that I think is the real egregious sort of unjust thing that I would react to, as opposed to,
Well,
because it's just a few years, it's not, we're not talking
you know
like,
what though, Andy? The thing that actually is similar for us is that we both have older Gen X siblings. So I think it burns a little bit, but the difference I think between the two of us is that my sister, who's 6 years older than me, really only bought a year or two before me because she was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to property. So she is, think of her, right? Because she's even more upset because all of her kind of like cohort bought early. And, when Gen Xers traveled the world, they were the ones that were bitten by the travel bug. But the ones that didn't buy property and they went traveling, they're the ones that it's like, oh, talk about FOMO. They really have FOMO because, every one of their friends have crazy property. But if you bought literally 5 or 6 years later, man, you missed out.
Yeah, well, I mean, to our Gen X listeners, I would say that the distinction isn't whether you're Gen X or Boomers or Y or whatever. The distinction is, did you get kissed on the dick by fairy because you bought property before they doubled, tripled in price, right?
Yeah.
And that tends to be more correlated with Gen X's than it is Gen Ys or millennials, whatever.
But life is all about that, man. Like, my parents always tell this story how when they decided to finally try to get some kind of investment property, they were looking around, and like a lot of people of that boomer generation, they were sold the dream of buying property on the Sunshine Coast or in Brisbane instead of Sydney. And they were all fucked.
Yeah.
And if only they took that money and they put it in Sydney, they would literally have multiples instead of the shitty Brisbane market.
We haven't talked about this much on the podcast, if at all, but like those that bought Bitcoin.
Well, the story is still, if you can get your money out, most platforms are stopping that now.
Oh, well, Stan Bankman-Fried, but like, let's say Bitcoin, because just for context, right? I mean, Bitcoin, it's like 100 times what it was, like it's just 100, it's worth 100 times more than what it has been in the past, right? And the thing is, like, I remember like very vividly and having very conscious, like Bitcoin wasn't this thing that like I only learnt about in the last couple of years. Like, I remember having conversations with people literally 10 years ago about Bitcoin, even about like, oh yeah, like Bitcoin's popular in China because they use it to get the money out of, like, through capital controls and all that, and like literally had this consciousness of Bitcoin, and have always dismissed it. Like, even now I would dismiss it as, oh, that's like, why would you invest money in Bitcoin? But like, even at that time, like 10 years ago, like if I put like even $1,000 in Bitcoin, like I'd
baby, we're going to the moon.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that.
But look,
so that's
man, in for a penny, in for a pound. If you're a gambler, it's always going to come crashing down, right? And I think that too many people in that side of the world, or any kind of new asset class that's growing, it's a lot of risk, right? High risk,
but
high reward.
even with Bitcoin, it's like the people attracted to it are the people, like the last people you would go to for like financial advice, right? They are literally like the people who were suckered in by the Tom Brady ad, right? And bought it.
It was a good ad
because they heard it was a good investment by their taxi driver or something, right?
All right, let's move on.
All right. So we thought today we would discuss a couple of notable, high-profile, let's just call them racist sort of incidents that happened over the last couple of weeks.
I love a good racist incident.
And, do you know, like, I was having a look at some of the stats, like some of the listener stats on our episodes. And funnily enough, the ones that kind of seem to... So one of the stats we can look at is retention, audience retention. So those who listen to an episode but don't just listen to, like, the first 5 minutes and then, exit and stop listening, but that listen the whole way. And the ones that seem to have the highest listener retention seem to be, like, the really controversial, like, race-oriented episodes. So we're going to give you another racist episode here. Now, earlier this week, you went on the road on behalf of the Middle, and you went and sought some views from the general public on how they felt about one of these racist incidents, which we will talk about in a moment. But before we get into it, shall we play it?
Yeah, let's have a listen. Let's cross to our man in the field.
All right, guys, so today we're talking about Sam Kerr and her recent racial slur that she's been tried for in court in the UK. So the question for you guys today is, do you believe that the words, "you white bastard," is a racist slur?
Nah, I don't think it's a racist slur. She probably shouldn't have said white, and looking back retrospectively, but it's not that deep. I don't think she should be going to court over calling someone a bastard. Either way, yeah.
Yeah, I think like the charges are a bit extreme, but yeah.
Is it racist though?
Yeah.
Well, by all definitions, it is racist. It's being prejudiced towards someone for their skin color, but is it as serious as it's being? I don't think so.
Is calling someone a white bastard racist?
I don't think so. That's not a slur. Bastard's not a slur. You can call anyone a slur. You can call anyone bastard.
Guy picks up on bastard.
I don't think it's racist.
It's not a slur, but it does involve race. That would make it racist.
I think the basis of it is on the oppression of people of color, historically by white people. It's not a result of actual prejudice, and it's more of actual, like,
He's got a bit of a Sam
oppression.
Bankman freeze
Sam.
about him.
Totally, it's the hair.
Maybe you're right. Maybe he's right.
That Jew fro.
Change your answer now.
Yeah, I'm going to change it to what he said.
Jew fro.
Thanks, boys. Thanks for the time. Is calling someone a white bastard racist?
I mean, maybe. Well, I find that's very discriminating against.
I mean, I guess bringing up color could just be counted as racism.
Yeah.
Because yeah.
So my question for you today is calling someone a white bastard racist?
This guy was good, man. He'll be...
I don't think it's good to offend anyone. Also, no one is really above the law, so I think she should be held accountable for it. Yeah.
Does the term, "you white bastard," is that racist to you?
Depends how it's used, I guess. Yeah. If it's used in like, if you're in like a game or something, but if it's like used in like, if you're just fighting with someone or like verbally, like, it's a bit too far, like it's a bit dragged.
Very considerate.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for being. Do you consider that to be racist?
Did you get that word, dragged?
Well,
what does that mean, Andy?
Normally, what I like to do is I like to first look at the context behind things and to get a better idea before I make up my mind.
Yeah.
So Roger, Sam Kerr, do you want to maybe start by giving our listeners an overview, just in case they're not aware what happened with Sam Kerr?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of it, but the key points are that on a night out, Sam Kerr, the captain of the Matildas female women's soccer team, had a night out. She was pretty drunk, may have even been sick in the back of a cab, and there was an altercation with the cab driver. But when the police were called, apparently she used something to the nature of, "You stupid white bastard." That's what she kind of called the police officer. Now, this is in the UK, and it's over a year ago, I believe. So right now, the court proceedings are going to charge her. Now, in the UK, The issue is more about whether it's racially charged. And if it is, essentially it's a hate crime and it carries a much harsher penalty. So really, the question here is like calling someone white, and we've spoken about this at length. Is it actually racist, right? Like, is it actually a thing? Is it being white a race? Or if you believe people like Robin DiAngelo, is whiteness the absence of race, right? And I think that's an interesting piece, right? And asking people out in public what they think, it's a great one because it's something that you can say. You don't have to say much. It's such a short question, but it requires a fair bit of thinking. Yeah. I mean, when I asked you that question, Andy, what's your initial response? Like,
Well,
just
okay,
if someone asked you that in the street.
Yeah. Well, so I want to maybe track back a little bit and work through the way this came to like public attention. And I think I even sent you a screenshot when it first came to light, because it was like she was charged with like committing some sort of racist slur or something, right? I go, oh my God. I remember just thinking at the time, oh, this is going to be such like a good one, because like the weight of like fandom behind the Matildas and just the good news story of the Matildas last year and her being their star player and this national hero kind of thing, and the significant overlap you have between like Matilda's bandwagoners and just general progressive kind of anti-racist sentiment, like that they're not going to be able to reconcile this. They're not going to be able to attack their hero. It's just, it's not going to work for them. And lo and behold, it turns out that she didn't call someone like, let's say a minority group, like a word that would not be nice to call a minority group. It turns out, like she said, like she called like a white bastard, right? And in fact, the fact that we can repeat that on this podcast without even like second guessing ourselves kind of means it's not the thing that most people think of when they hear like someone said something racist. And but what I really enjoyed watching, like got the popcorn out, was like all the social justice warriors coming out with this thing and still sort of maintaining some kind of consistent position. No, we must treat any matter to do with race like really seriously. And I'm thinking of people like Craig Foster, Peter Fitzsimons, and like then being absolutely pilloried by like another segment of the left saying, no, you don't understand. Racism's all about like power imbalances and the fact that white people have the power and means it's, and then, then there's Craig Foster issuing his, his statement, I've been educated through this. It's just like, oh, come on, like, fuck off. Just at the end of the day, you are a political player and you're engaging in this public debate because you want to have an opinion and a public opinion because that's what brings you notoriety. And anyway, so long way to then get to your actual question. So is it racist?
Yeah, give it to me.
Yeah. Well, I probably, I think probably a lot of the people in your video, I think are relatively spot on in that, yes, by some technical definition of the term, it is racist, but does it have any punch? Is it a significant thing to call a white person like a white person? Does that have the same charge as calling like a black person and making that like almost part of your insult to them? And I think there is a fundamental difference. And on that count, I think it's okay. I think what she said is quite okay. And I think in the UK, they have quite stringent laws and things around this. And I think this is a good piece of jurisprudence for them to work through.
So can I ask you a follow-up question?
Indeed.
Why do you think they are charging her?
There would be some law that would say you can't say things like this. And this police officer who's pushing it to the nth degree is being a little bit of an activist, right?
So you think it's the officer who's personally chosen to pursue this?
Well, I suspect it must be. Like, I mean, the fact that he's a police officer, and look, to be fair, he might have just been doing his job and there might have been like a lot of quite vile attacks against the police officer for just doing his job, and he's just picked the thing that he can actually, get some like daggers into her on, right? But nonetheless, I think for someone to follow this, like maybe to put it another way, I don't think, and maybe this is like a good insight into the problem of these sorts of like racist claims and attacks and like the nature of power imbalances. I don't think genuinely, and this is the privilege of being a white person or identifying, or at least not identifying as a race other than white, or non-white, is that
I thought you said you weren't white from our
well,
race episode.
I'm not. I don't identify as white, but nonetheless, I don't identify as any other non-white race either, right? So the privilege of being in that position is that if someone tries to invoke your race as some kind of negative attack on you, it doesn't land. So if someone called me a white bastard, I probably would not I'd probably be more offended they called me a bastard than a white bastard, to be honest. So I think that's quite relevant. And I think that does underscore some of the, like, it does illustrate some of the nuances with some of these sort of racist type words or attacks that we can hear in public.
I just love, actually, one of the comments on this piece of, when we released this this footage was, wait a minute, isn't Sam Kerr going out with a white chick? And I just thought that was so good because, being in a biracial relationship myself, if anything, it makes the white person more racist, not less, because they feel more comfortable to have a free pass. It's like, I can say really semi-racist things about Asian men because, I'm sleeping with one, so that surely gives me a pass.
Well, that's how I feel about with you, Roger. Not to sidetrack us, but
you're going to have to maybe phrase that a bit better, actually, too.
Well, so I went to Hot Pot restaurant tonight, and I'll tell you what, that was like, I did have a feeling of like being the odd, like the minority in the room, not so, just because I literally was the minority in the room, but also because there was a way of doing things. There was a culture in this restaurant, like in terms of how to order, how it all works, like what you do, that I did not get or understand. And they, like the wait staff and the people, like they had such disdain for me.
They were just impatient with you?
I was just like, what is this sauce? Like, what are you bringing out the soy sauce and adding like all these things to it? And what is this for? And like, do I have to pay for it? Is it extra? And then just like rolling their eyes at me. So,
how you're describing the way you felt was exactly how my parents felt like being two elderly Asian, people, when they had to order from a packed and busy Subway in Byron Bay, and they were like, "Oh, what toppings can I have?" And the lady, the sandwich artist, was just so impatient and frustrated. It's like, "Lady, like I can't, like the cucumbers are there, the capsicums are there. Like, what do you want?" And they're like, and there's like a line behind, like that. It's kind of like that feeling, there's a flow to Subway, like there's a flow to the Aldi checkout. You've got to come ready to dance, right? Like you got to kind of know what you want. Same feeling.
It's my turn to be the street reporter. What's your take? What's your take on the Sam Kerr white bastard incident?
First of all, I think that if I was to answer this, if someone was just to point a microphone at me at the street, and I first of all, I say don't film me without a good softbox because I'm used to one now, and the lighting has to be right. But after that, I would say, in my gut, my initial reaction is, of course, it's racist. All right, because I don't need to read a book where Robin DiAngelo redefines what racism is to me, right? Like that's not how I process it, right? And you can play semantics, but essentially, I do understand the whole thing about prejudice plus power equals racism, but there's a more fundamental way, I think, to define it, which is you are discriminating based upon someone's race, full stop, in a more general way. And I think that when you're obviously trying to use it as a takedown or something derogatory, like you white bastard, it is racist. And so that's where I sit. And I do agree with that.
But see, like, this is the thing, right? It gets used very often in the workplace. Even the workplace, the term white, male, pale, and stale, right? That is a very accepted thing to say if, let's say, you're organising an event and the panel, they're all over 50 and they're all men and they're all white blokes, right? It would be very acceptable to say, look, this panel for this event, they're a bit white male Palin style, right?
I think that's changing though. I think it is. But yeah,
no,
you're right.
I don't.
I think it's changing.
I don't think it is. I haven't noticed
white men are pushing back. White men are pushing back, right? And I think this is this red pill thing.
But there's nothing more like the
well, they're not pushing back, but they're putting, you know how they put their finger up to because I've got a point at a community centre.
But there's nothing like the optics of like a white, like a bunch of white blokes, you know, complaining about.
It's really hard for white men. But look, listen,
it doesn't work. It doesn't land.
That's why people like Tate and Peterson. Sorry to include those two together. But look at one of the best ways to describe what white privilege is to say that as a white person, you have 99 problems, but your race ain't one, right? And when it starts to become one because people call you a white bastard or call you, you know, pale and stale, or you're just a cis white man, like you're starting to lose that advantage. You're starting to lose that privilege, right? And I think that that's like okay for it to be pushed back, right? Like I think this is our obsession. This is where the obsession with equality takes you, right? Because if you're constantly pushing equality and you're trying to stamp out double standards, and this is clearly one of them. Now, you know, I'm not 12 years old. I realize that Sam Kerr calling a cop, you know, like a stupid white bastard is not going to do anything, right? That cop's not going to go home and like, you know, have to go through therapy or whatever it is, right? But that doesn't change the fact that in my gut, of course it's discriminatory against race. And I'm not interested in changing the definition to it's only about, racism is only about when there's some kind of historical oppression and it's bringing up some generational trauma. It can be both. It can be just like you are discriminating based on race, and that's probably not a great thing when it's done in a negative way. And that's it, right? That's it. And, you know,
again, just going back to the commenters in your video, the most sort of said, yes, it was racist, probably technically, in the same way as you're saying, yeah, it is racist sort of thing, right?
Well, I think people were, though, look, what I think was happening in real life, that's what happened, right? Except for that one guy who's like, it's not quite a few people said it was not racist, and especially the one that could articulate it in the more woke way, which was because it's not, these people aren't historically oppressed, right? So there's nothing you could even pretend to say to a white person that would make them feel that, right? And feel the trauma of that. But if you look at the comments online, most of them were just aggrieved by the fact that was happening.
They're just keyboard warriors who don't have to.
No, it's the people that I'm talking about. The white people pushing back. It's the white men pushing back.
I think there's a significant portion of the population who would buy into this thing as like this whole thing of racism is getting a bit ridiculous, and I think that their motivation isn't so much because they're offended as white people, but more that they just feel like we're in this post kind of.
It's a double standard. It's the injustice of the double standard.
Yeah, well, that's probably what they're acting to, but is that the relevant question? And the relevant question goes back to what you said before, which is like this cop is not actually really truly offended.
But Andy,
hang on. But what matters is the offense, right? What matters is this like the equivalent of like punching someone, right? Are you committing, are you deeply impacting them in some kind of way that it carries like weight? And when you call someone a white bastard who doesn't really, that's not a sensitive or sore point for them, you're not really punching them or causing them any damage, right? But if you call whatever minority group and you leverage as part of your, like, let's say some sort of criticism or attack on them, the color of their skin, that carries a lot more weight, a lot more punch, and it impacts people more.
I agree with you, but that doesn't change the definition for me, right? And the initial thing. And look, you don't know. This cop might not be white. What if this guy's Indigenous and you're calling him white, right? And it also works the other way. For example, even if it's positive, it's racist to say that all black men have big cocks, right? And that could be perceived as a good thing, but it's still racist to say that, or that Asians are good at math, because it's coming from a place where you are discriminating. Your assumptions are based on their race, right? And like you don't know. You don't actually know what's going on. What if that police officer was actually, he looked white, but he was Indigenous, or something like that, right? So there's a whole lot of things going there that the principle stands that if we want to get into a place where you're not basing assumptions on race, then I'm happy to keep that definition of racism as it stands, acknowledging all the things you said about power dynamics, right? I'm not 12 years old. I know that it's not going to impact it, but you can still call out those double standards, right? If you want the needle to move on these things.
Yeah. I just think it's relevant, though, that at the end of the day, I think in this sort of situation, what we should care about isn't like the semantics of a classification, right, of the term and what was said. But what actually really truly matters is, were the words cutting for an individual? Were the words, is that person, that cop in this case, going to really feel belittled and like really, like something like something's taken away from them, right, in saying that? And I think in this case, no. But like, if I can sort of foresee, or at least understand, that in other instances involving different, historical contexts and different minority groups or different histories or whatever, that there are quite significant sensitivities, and that one sensitivity is proportionally, like orders of magnitude, more touchy than, calling someone a white bastard is relevant. Yeah. Notwithstanding that it is racist, or that it in a classification sense.
I love that piece. I don't know. I can't remember the comedian that does it, but he talks about how, like, when black people are describing a different type of race, they say the race and then motherfuckers after it, and it makes it fine. So they go, oh, those Asian motherfuckers. But then if the white people do it, all you have to do is switch the motherfucker first and then race. It goes all wrong. It becomes racist. So those motherfucking Asians. And it's so true, right? It's just the sequencing of words and the intent, and everybody's just riled up to this like sensitivity of jumping at shadows, right? Like, this is all just sensitivity gone wrong in some ways, but I just don't like this kind of worming away from the issue, right? Like that, and I do take offense. I'm not even like, this is the thing, right? So I'll bring it up now. I think I mentioned to you that I've always had a curiosity of where my ethnicity came from, and all my life people have spoken to me how I looked Eurasian, right? So I decided to do a DNA test, and finally the results came back, right? So they send you the swabs, you take the swabs, you send it back to the lab in Austin, Texas, and they essentially extract your DNA, and then they match it to the ethnicity groups from the regions that they have, right? So they can tell you essentially where your DNA comes from. And mine just came back, and I have 2 Chinese Malaysian parents, and all of my known relatives are from Asian heritage. So I was expecting, okay, maybe it's going to be like 95% Chinese, and maybe there'll be like a splash of something that might explain why I have slightly more Western European features. It came back 40% Spanish. 40% Spanish. And then there was also Italian in there. There was 7% South American from Chile. And then the rest was from China and essentially the Malaysian islands, right? So that was Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia.
I knew you were a white guy.
And there was a splash. There was actually 3% from Central, which is like, Iraqi, Afghan. So all I'm saying is, right, like, so that has rocked my world in a lot of ways, right? Because there's a whole part of my culture, like half of my culture, that I don't understand. And I think that this is where this race thing leads to. You don't actually know what you are, right? You don't know what you are.
That's all right. We can make some chorizo sausages together one day.
Ole. but this is what I mean, right? Like, you don't really know what it is that, you don't know your ancestors. You don't even know your great-great-great-grandparents, right? And that can make all the difference. So you're just living this moment in time of your culture.
But it doesn't
passed
matter.
down by your parents.
But really, it doesn't matter at all, right? Your DNA and your who you're most similar to in a statistical sense, as I think these tests are done. It doesn't matter. What matters is like the concept of identity is it's a social construct, right? It's like the fact that you identify as someone from this background or that background. Like this is all about how you're brought up. It's all about your the culture of the society you live in. It's all about the kind of narrative you tell yourself. And it doesn't really truly matter what your DNA is. It doesn't really truly matter. Like if you, one of the most controversial topics you can bring up around Indigenous Australians is genuinely like what percentage of like, if you trace back their family tree, like what's the minimum threshold required to count yourself as Indigenous, right? Is it enough that you had a great grandfather who was Indigenous or grandmother who was like, that's a very controversial topic. And I think in the modern context of, the society we live in today, the answer is, well, it doesn't really matter. What actually matters is, are you accepted by that community as Indigenous? The other incident that happened in the last couple of weeks was, as our Australian listeners may know, the National Rugby League had its opening round in Las Vegas. And
Viva Las Vegas.
Yeah, big event for rugby league. And it went off without a hitch, but there was an incident on the field, right, which is where you had a footballer of Samoan heritage, but I think, if I understand correctly, was born in Australia or certainly lived all of his life, if not most of his life, in Australia. On the field, called a player of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander descent a monkey. And I'm not exactly sure the way it was said, whether he said, "Oh, you monkey," or "You're a monkey," or what he said. But anyway, monkey was the slur that was raised. And this came up in the game, and they stopped the game, and he made it like a formal complaint. He was quite upset about it, apparently. And after the game, the perpetrator, the Samoan player, or he's of Samoan heritage, I think didn't really quite appreciate how significant it was in terms of. He said, "Oh yeah, that's just a bit of, banter on the field, and it's all right. You can have a chat with me afterwards."
Monkey business.
Yeah, but it actually turned into this quite big thing. Then you had some other players in the NRL, the rugby league competition, sort of saying something quite serious needs to happen about this. We've got to stamp this out of the game, and so on and so forth. This player has been banned for 8 games, but maintains that, or at least the line is that it wasn't used as a racist slur, so it wasn't intended in a racist kind of way. And I actually have a personal story to tell in this space, but I want to get your reactions to it first.
All right. Well, number one, my first reaction is that I don't believe monkeys are even native to Australia. So, there's got to be some room to move there. And then the second thing that comes to mind is the Black Eyed Peas' infamous album Monkey Business. And now I'm beginning to think a different way to look at that. But, when it comes down to it, this is the key, right? Like if someone is offended, they're offended, right? Like I think that's really, really what it comes down to. But when I look at it, this is black on black crime, baby. Like this is, I don't think I'm like with Anthony Mundine on this one. I just don't think that this is, this warrants anything personally. But again, it doesn't matter what I think, because if someone's offended, offense has been taken, right? So end of story. But yeah, personally, I kind of think just because and he probably said it because under the shelter that they're both, people of color, and yeah, I don't see the same issue personally because of that.
He said something that if he genuinely, and like we don't know what's in his head, but if he genuinely did not appreciate the damage or the like what that word means to the other person, and he has no foresight of the power of that word, then I don't think you really can hold him accountable to the same well, you certainly can't hold him accountable to it to the same extent as you would if he did know what the word was, right? So I think, and that's akin to like, you know, if someone is negligent about something in a knowing kind of way, you should hold them accountable for being negligent. But like if someone just does an accident and, you know, didn't really intentionally mean any ill will, like you have to ask yourself, well, what's the point here of like holding this person to some sort of like standard that
maybe
they
should make an
have made
example
any
for
mistake.
others or something, right?
Yeah, like I just think there's got to be some room for, but of course we don't know that. Now, my personal anecdote, and this is where I do think could be potentially a little bit more grey than maybe what it would be to like the general public, like, oh, someone calling like an Indigenous person a monkey, like, oh my God, that's like horrible. Especially after we've been through like the Adam Goods thing, you know, an Indigenous Aussie rules footballer who was called an ape, and that was quite a significant.
Yeah, but that's like by a young white lady, right?
It was a young girl, I think, and that just that was quite a traumatic experience for like many people. So, but look, I think that just I think, you know, people today in Australia would kind of know that that's quite an offensive thing to say. But the reason why I do feel there's a little bit of grey area here potentially is that I actually had to have a conversation with my son because he plays this game on his he's got like a video game kind of device thing, and it's a game called Gorilla Tag, and it's literally like tag, but like in a video game setting. And there's a whole culture in this video game world because it's like one of those ones where you can talk to your mates and like other players and stuff. And there is like a culture in this game of calling other people monkey. So I kept hearing him saying, you monkey, like, but that's part of the culture of the game, and he was saying that because like literally are a monkey in the game, right? It's part of the game. And I actually had to have a conversation with him to say,
sorry, just to clarify, are they're monkeys tagging each other in the game?
Yes, yeah, they're monkeys tagging each other in the game.
All right,
so like it's like, so the monkey connotation is because they're monkeys, right? So but that's like this, there's like, it's, you know, it's like there's a subculture in games, on like when you go into these little niches on the internet and, you know, whatever, there's just a culture, right? So that's part of the culture of it. And I had to explain to him that, like, because I started to notice that he was doing it. Well, okay, first of all, I'm not sure I want him saying that in the context of the game either, but like I started to notice he was saying it outside of the context of the game, and I had to just sit him down and say, look, I know you don't mean this in any kind of negative way, it's just part of the game, but like I had to explain to him that like just you should not say that. Like
what did you actually say?
I told him, I just said, I want you to stop saying that. I don't want you to say that anymore. And I explained to him that in the context of like that, I know that he wasn't saying it in any kind of negative way, and he didn't mean, and it was just part of the game and all of that. But however, even so, he still shouldn't say it because you can't be sure that you will not say it accidentally without meaning it in a negative way to someone who will take it in a different way. And so I had to talk him through that and explain that to him, and he hasn't said it since. So when we come back to the rugby league players, I kind of feel like there is some scope for people to be saying things I don't know that he plays gorilla tag. I'm not suggesting that's the case, but it's I don't think it's like a slam dunk that he knew that it was had a racist meaning.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure. Like, is it? Did you really have to do that? I mean,
well, I think I feel.
Wouldn't the more informative lesson be that gorillas are apes? And just say, you dirty ape. but really, like, it's a game, and they're literal animated monkeys.
No, but if you're saying it, but the problem is that might be fine, and that's why I didn't say anything up until actually literally the last couple of weeks.
Also, where's he going to bump into a black guy?
Like, if you start hearing him say it out of the game, that's when it's going to be a risk for him, right? And he might just be, and like,
man, what's the world coming to? He's playing a freaking game.
but this is the thing, right? Like, people who don't understand that there's this game called Gorilla Tag and they all call each other monkey are just gonna, like, they're gonna think we're bloody racist, right? They're gonna think, oh, we call other people monkey, right? He learns it from us, right? So it's just very complicated, and I think, for his own sake and for the sake of the people who might take it the wrong way, I think it was an intervention.
Like, what we're talking about here is a great example of, like, I'm listening to the story and all I'm thinking is, hey, I've got ethnic privilege because I don't worry about this shit. This is not something that worries me, right? Like, I'm not, and I don't think about it, and I don't feel the need to think about it, right? And I'm like, hey, that's ethnic privilege right there. That's
so
a
what
good
you're saying is that it sucks to be white, right?
Yeah. Well, I just think that, like, it's okay. Let me pose this hypothetical to you, all right? So exact same scenario with the NRL and the Samoan calling the Indigenous man a monkey. What if, okay, the perpetrator wasn't Samoan but was Indigenous? Does that change anything for you?
Sorry, if the
perpetrator was, so if the perpetrator wasn't Samoan, but was in fact Indigenous, so it was Indigenous on Indigenous, and they called each other monkey. Does that change anything for you?
Well, I think that's probably akin to the N-word being used among
keep going.
African Americans, right?
Yeah, keep going.
And I think that's relevant to the meaning that the other player would have taken for the word. So it's not just that the word is said in a very sort of, almost like we're dealing with computer code here, where it's like, if someone says this, then react and feel this way, right? So I think it is relevant to that question, and I think would have landed differently in that particular setting.
Exactly.
But then I don't think it would have been said if that was the case. Like, I can't imagine.
Again, this is the sensitivities we're rubbing up against, which is worth talking about. All I'm saying is, on the scale of outrage, you've got a white middle-class girl calling Adam Goodes a monkey. Ooh, that's bad. Everyone, straight to jail, do not pass go, right? And then you've got, okay, a non-white person, a person of color, but not the same race, calling an Indigenous person a monkey. Not great. But surely you must agree less bad than the white girl calling Indigenous person monkey. And then let's go, straight black on black. And it's an Indigenous person calling another Indigenous person a monkey. Oh, we're in an area where maybe we don't understand and we probably won't comment. See what I mean? Like, if you have to kind of acknowledge that there is meaningful differences along that spectrum. Well, and if you can get yourself to say that, then you're halfway there to understanding that this can be seen in a different way, and it's a lesser crime because it's not a power imbalance. Going back to that first question, right? That first question with Sam Kerr, we're not talking about the same power imbalance. Like you said, there's Apple and then everyone else. There's white and then there's everyone else. And if you're part of that minority already, then it might not be the most pleasant thing to say, and you may not feel like there are cultural bubbles around this stuff, but it's not the same. So acknowledge that.
Just thinking back to the Adam Goodes example, I mean, if anything, one of the reasons this caused like such a significant scar on, like I think a lot of people was that there at the time there was a backlash against Adam Goodes because it was like, how dare he like bully this little girl who said this thing maybe unknowingly. From his point of view, it was like, this is horrible language. Like, this can't be accepted. Doesn't matter who said it or for what reason. We can't tolerate this. And I don't. It's so egregious that she needs to leave, right? And that was his stance. And I think in the kind of with the sort of benefit of a few years, I think most of Australia would probably accept that or have come to terms with that being a reasonable thing. But at the same time, at the time, that wasn't the deal. The whole thing was, no, she's like the victim here because she was kicked out and she's like had the spotlight put on her and she was made to feel like, and be honest, like, to be honest, that if I think about my son, I think about what kind of experience might he go through. So for me, in thinking about protecting him and his interests, I am thinking about 100%. I'm thinking about, I do not want, and it doesn't matter it might be a very low percentage chance that it'll happen, but I don't want him to go through a situation where he is blamed or someone alleges something against him that is totally not right for him, like it's totally not true of him, but that someone has chosen to take that pathway because they can. And he would, in that situation, so it's like, if I'm being 100%, it's not, my motivation is, my first order priority is him. It's not,
protect yourself at all times.
I'm not thinking about, well, someone might be offended if he says that. I'm thinking about, well, I know that.
Well, isn't that everything that's wrong with this situation?
Well, what I will say is I think we obsess a little bit too much as a society, I think, about like some of these issues. Like, I think we probably are less resilient than we were in the past to some of these things. And I think that's in some ways, well, I think it's a good thing that it's less acceptable to be racist. I think that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. But I think it's not it's not a good move if people are less resilient to hearing racist things. I think it would be good if we moved both of those in the same direction, in the sense that there are more penalties and more costs and more punishments, like social punishments if you're racist and you say racist things and intolerant things. But I think at the same time, we should also, like, it's also a positive thing if people are more resilient to hearing, including when it regards you, not just other people, but yourself, that, you're more, you don't have to accept it or tolerate it or anything like that, but at least to not bundle up in a ball of tears, right? Because someone said something that you didn't like.
I totally agree with the resilience aspect. And I think that what we're losing as a result of some of these things that you're talking about, like moving in a direction that lacks resilience, is the ability for, as a general public, being able to look at the situation and kind of consider the context without feeling like if you don't fully support or come out in, damnation of something, that you are part of the problem, right? And I think that's the hard thing, right? Like, for example, you can, what's the actor that plays Kramer on Seinfeld?
Michael Richards.
He had the infamous, racial slur where he had that kind of mind snap and used the N-word and all this kind of stuff at a stand-up session many years ago where it was, infamous. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that live stand-up comedy at one of these clubs is exactly the conditions that would back you into a corner to try to say some outrageous shit and double down to try to get some laughs, right? And this is an environment that's encouraging you to go to the extreme on everything. Now, doesn't make any of it right, doesn't excuse it, but hell, let's talk about this, right? In the same way that this girl should never have ever have called Adam Goodes a monkey, but there was a culture, like you said, just like this guerrilla game, of sledging players. And there is today still a culture of sledging players from the opposing team, right? And that's alive and well. In the same way that say like the reading festival. It's like part of the culture to throw bottles at the musicians. Like it's there are all sorts of like weird things that form, like you said, in this game, but in real life. And let's just be intelligent enough to take some things and look at the reasons why perhaps some things are more likely to happen than others, right? And same with this situation where it's two minorities that have offended each other, and that is void of this kind of white person of color power dynamic that we saw in the other example.
Well, now I know you're 40% Spanish. I'll lay off the Spanish jokes.
Well, that's the thing, man. Like, Spanish culture is not really represented. I don't know the first thing about it. But I'm going to find out. There's got to be more than a chorizo.
Oh, well, maybe you can dream about it during your siesta.
Well, I think that's obviously...